Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, hello everyone. Good morning. It's still evening in my time zone, but it's wonderful to be able to be here practicing together. I thought today we could maybe talk a little bit about, I'll speak a little bit, maybe 10 minutes or so, introduction to the practice of Cittānupassana, which maybe people will be familiar with in name. It is the third of the Satipatthanas. But it's possible that people are not so familiar with the actual practice of Cittānupassana, or at least perhaps not have very clear ideas about how to practice Cittānupassana. So I will speak on that for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we could meditate together for 30 or 40 minutes, and then have about 10 minutes at the end for questions, if people had any questions. So just by way of introduction, as I mentioned, the Cittānupassana, or the observation anupassana of the citta, of the mind, or another translation is actually consciousness. The observation of consciousness is the third of the Satipatthana, or the foundations of mindfulness. When most people come to meditation in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, the method which most people are introduced to is breath meditation, so anapanasati, which is one of the practices of kayanupassana, or observation or meditation on the body. It's the first of the practices given in the Satipatthana Sutta on knowing the body. And so if you enter in through the Dharma gate of the Goenka tradition, you will keep your meditation focused here in this triangle of the upper lip and the base of the nostrils. And you'll try to focus just on that, day in, day out, day in, day out. If it's a 10-day retreat, you do that for 3 days. If it's a 3-month retreat, you might do that for a month. So that's a very specific practice. If you've entered the Dhamma through the Pa'ak Sayadaw system, you will similarly pay attention to breath. There, as I understand it, the recommendation is to pay attention to the breath actually slightly beneath the nostrils, but all the same, you're paying attention to the breath right there. And you're not following the breath as it goes into the lungs, into the belly, but just paying attention right there, in, out, in, out. A very specific, a very direct way of directing the mind. Now, with Cittānupassana, with observation of the mind, the perspective is more broad. So if the focus in the Kayagata Sati, or Anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath through the body, if you're focusing right here and practicing concentration by being focused on one very small point. And again, if you do this, the mind will get concentrated. Rather than trying to do that, with Cittānupassana, we make the mind as big as possible. We make the mind as large and as expansive and as immeasurable as possible. And this is just another way to practice concentration. And it can be a bit more subtle. And it can be, for some people, more difficult. The breath is very coarse. The breath can be very heavy, you can see it when you look very clearly. It's either coming in or it's going out. It's coming in, it's going out. And so it's very easy if you've got a small focus like this camera, you look at it, and then if the mind wanders away, so as the metaphor, if I look away, then it's very easy to remember that actually, no, I'm not paying attention to this thing over here. I'm not paying attention to this thought of past or future. I'm trying to pay attention right here. But with Cittānupassana, rather than if the mind starts following thoughts, or if we start getting lost in our thinking, rather than bringing the mind back to one small point, the breath, or a small area of focus, the mind wanders off into a thought, and then you just bring it back to an expansiveness. It's an expanding rather than a shifting or contracting. So that's the general principle. But then the question comes, how do you do this? How do you actually, one, make the mind big? And then once the mind is in this expansive state, that's not the full story. You actually have to then stay there in this expansive mind and actually look and rest in this expansive mind and keep coming back to this still expansive mind. So the formula in the Satipatthana Sutta, it reads, when the mind is filled with passion, one knows that. When the mind is filled with non-passion, one knows it. When the mind is filled with anger or non-anger, delusion or non-delusion, when it's constricted or unconstricted, liberated or unliberated, constricted or enlarged, one knows all of these things. So it's not so important, actually, if the mind, if I start thinking about this and that, it doesn't have to be so much of a problem, because within the blink of an eye, rather than just being clamped on one little thought, the mind can just expand and engulf, in a way, engulf and totally surround that thought. And this way of practice can be easier to practice throughout one's daily life. While you're in conversations, you're in meetings, you're talking with your family members or your friends, it's hard to pay attention to the breath, between every word. Whereas if your meditation object is an expansive mind, then you just expand. You just let go of the constriction around the words or the constriction around perceptions, and you just know it. And that's, it's like opening a hand. Opening a hand is easier than clenching your hand. And it's similar with the mind. So what we'll do in the next 40 minutes is pay attention to how to expand the mind and then to rest there. So for the first 10 minutes, we'll focus on, you can think of it as vertical expansiveness. So we'll close the eyes, or you can even do it with the eyes open, but then expanding your sense of the body up and down. In the next 10 minutes, we'll experiment with expanding the mind, expanding our sense of space, left to right through the body. Then after that, we'll experiment with expanding the mind front and to back, and then just around and without measure that way. So if people are not already doing so, you can come to a restful posture. You want to be sitting up straight, but fully relaxed. Upright, but settled. And just as the body, the spine is upright, but the muscles are relaxed, so too with the mind. We want it to be upright and awake, bright, but also settled. So experiment with your mind's eye. How far does consciousness, how far does your mind extend upwards and downwards? Can you experience and know the whole length of the body? From where you're sitting, perhaps the soles of your feet or the bottoms of your legs, all the way up through the torso, through the arms, and through the top of the head. And just look where in your experience, especially with eyes closed, where do you stop? Where is the felt extent, upwards and downwards, of the mind and the body? Is consciousness inside the body, inside the head? Or is the body inside of consciousness? Is consciousness in the body? Or is the body inside consciousness? And rest in this knowing. The mind knowing the mind in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Chitte Cittānupassana viharati atapi sampajano satima vinaya loke abhijja domanasa. Is your experience of the topmost part of your head or the bottommost part of your body, is it a clear line such that you could say, at this point, at this line, this is where the body stops and the rest of the world begins? Or is there no such clear line? With eyes closed in your experience, is it a clear line, or is it more of a fuzzy cloud? The top of your head, the bottom of your body. How tall can your mind be? How tall can your mind know? And when thoughts arise, the future, the past, note that there is thinking. And then our object right now is the expansive vertical height of the body and the mind. Knowing the mind from the length of our body. Big mind. And now we can experiment with letting our awareness expand outwards, left to right. So if you think of the heart or the mind settled in the heart base, how wide can you know? Is consciousness in the width of the body? Somewhere between our leftmost shoulder, our rightmost shoulder? Or is the body inside consciousness? a thought arises, and immediately, just in a blink of an eye, space, just expansive. The mind has no boundary, left to right. Wide as the sea, even wider. And if any contraction begins to appear in the body or in the mind, as the Buddha teaches, we put aside this stress, this domanassa, this aversion. We notice it. This is just aversion. This is just contraction. And once again, the mind is large. The mind is wide, expansive. And if there's a physical contraction or even physical pain, you can similarly look at the edges of it. Say a sharp feeling in the ankle. Where are the felt scent edges of that pain? Is it a clear thing? A real and essential and true permanent thing? Or is it just a cloud? Just a temporarily arising field of sensation? And you can let the mind be bigger than that, totally encompass it. And the expansive mind, just like the ocean, is not at all bothered by some contraction in a small part of the sea. So when you have this perspective, all the muscles of the body can just relax. Buddha gave a simile of the Ganges River, that if someone tries to take a torch that's on fire, a big log that's on fire, and tries to set the Ganges on fire, or if someone else tries to set the Ganges on fire, there's no way they can do that because the Ganges is deep, vast, exalted, immeasurable. And similarly, when our mind is this vast and wide and expansive, so much more so than the Ganges or even the ocean, when the mind is this wide, then something so small as a pain in my knee, a contraction in my forehead or around my eyes, or a thought of this or that, it's just so small in comparison to the expansiveness of the mind. And having experimented, looked at, witnessed the height of the mind, so to speak, the width, we can now experience the depth. So from the back, from our back to our front, from the back of the head, the spine, the full length of our back, through our body, can you notice the depth of both the body and the mind? How far, close, and long is the mind? Is there any felt ending? Back to the front. And just let the mind settle in this spaciousness. With practice, we don't have to continuously pay attention to this spreading of the mind, whether it's up or down, left, right, front to back, to make the mind big, to make awareness big. But we can just settle in a way in the middle of all of it. In truth, there is no center to this awareness, but you can know from the center. And this is a place where we can find rest and settling. When the mind is rested and settled like this, knowing bright in every direction, all around, it's maybe a bit like, you say, a spider in a very intricate web, 3 dimensions around it. And once it has made the web, all it has to do is just sit there. And then if something, a fly comes and gets caught in some part of the web, the fly can, or the spider can just go and wrap that fly up and then just come back and rest again. That's what we do as we sit here with the mind, knowing the mind in and of itself. A thought will arise. We note it and then just come back to rest. Ardent, alert, mindful. Putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. And for the last minutes of this meditation session, we can bring it all together and practice what the Buddha called the Vijnana Kasinayatana, the sphere of universal consciousness, which he described as we know, sanjanati, we recognize, uddhang adho tiriyang, advayang, appamanang. So we know above, we know below, we know around. The mind is not to advayang. The mind is appamanang. It is boundless, abundant, exalted, immeasurable. And if you think, what is he talking about? That's a thought. And then let the mind go big. And a tiny little thought like that will just be totally submerged in awareness. Another simile of the Buddha. It's like someone comes with a paintbrush and all sorts of different types of paint, different colors, and thinks, I will paint the sky. But there's no possibility for that to happen because the empty space is abundant, exalted, immeasurable. Similarly, a tiny thought just arises and passes away when what we care about is the space, not the story, not the image, not the painting. Just go big. And why do we do that? Because it feels better. It feels better to rest in a mind expanding above, below, around, non-dual, boundless. And into this expansiveness, spacious mind, for the very last 2 minutes, let this wide, tall, broad, expansive mind be perfumed with loving kindness, with metta. Just let the warm heart, well wishes, may I be happy, may all beings be happy. Soft. And just like the mind has no limits, similarly, our wish for other people's well-being has no limits. May no being be imprisoned in a hateful mind. And we can hopefully stay with this expansive mind. One wonderful thing about Cittānupassana is that there doesn't have to be such a clear distinction. Really, there doesn't have to be any distinction between when we're doing formal practice and when we go about our daily life. The more that we can stay aware from this embodied and expansive space, then the more effective we'll be in everything that we do. So we'll open it up to questions now, but people can really continue meditating, whether you do that with eyes open or eyes closed. It's really up to you. And when you practice with it, you can find that you can turn back, you can turn the light around and know the mind in this state, know this bright mind, whether the eyes are open or closed. Deepak, do you maybe want to see if anyone has questions?
कोणाला प्रश्न आहेत का काही? प्रश्न असतील तर हँड रेज करा किंवा चॅट बॉक्समध्ये टाका.
Good morning, Vante, Vandami.
Hello.
So when we are expanding our mind during the meditation, so is that some way that we can also reach to the devas or the non-human beings during we are doing expansion of our mind, and then we can give mitta to them also?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it might be a good idea when you're just practicing the pure Cittānupassana, then maybe paying attention more to just the spaciousness of the mind, and yeah, to the non-boundaryness of the mind. But when we shift over into metta bhavana, the expansiveness of metta, then that is a place where you can really give focus and even think about, whether it's people in this world, in the human world, your family, your friends, or people who've passed away, or people in beings in other realms, the devas, the angels, the brahmas. I think this way of having an expanded mind does make one, as that Vijnana Kasinayatana speaks of, it does actually mention advayang, so this non-dualness. And when you are really collapsing the barriers, when you're taking down the fences between where I am and where other people are, then there ceases to be such a distinction between me and you and me and the angels and there can be this energetic transfer or even communication. So yeah, I think this is a good way to do that. Have you had experience with that?
Not not the real experience, but yes, when I expand myself, I could feel that maybe I am with some devas, or I am giving them mitta.
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. Yeah, and to our children as well. So.
अजून प्रश्न आहेत का कोणाला? And I think there is no questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's always nice to come and meditate together. And Deepak, is it still the case that perhaps many of the meditators are still practicing and coming from the Pa'ak meditation system?
To this group?
Yes.
Not many, but they only 2 or 3 people went to Pao but
Okay.
we are teaching with the power of tradition.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
The teacher mostly from now in Aranya, Venerable
Uh-huh.
Bante Jnanasiri taking meditation instructions.
Uh-huh. Oh, good. Good.
Yes.
Okay. I was just curious. Well, thank you, Deepak, and thank you everyone for coming together. May the blessings of the Triple Gem brighten all of our lives, all of our minds. I can offer a blessing chant to close. Bhavatu Sambha Mangalang Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Buddhanubhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavatu Sambha Mangalang Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Dhammanubhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavatu Sambha Mangalang Rakantu Sambha Devata Sabha Sanghanubhavena Sarasoti Bhavantu Te.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Thank you for coming and guiding.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and hope everyone has a good rest of your day and a good month, a good week, a good year, and may we all grow in Dhamma.